I often talk about objectively founded morality, and it's sort of the idea that ethics emerges out of deterministic reality. A lot of people tell you morality is subjective because it basically happens a posteriori after experience. And without a subjective perception, morality doesn't emerge. But oftentimes, that's half the picture. It's actually less than half the picture because it leaves out the fact that all of reality is the foundation to be perceived. We're basically saying all morality rides on the fact that we perceive it. And it's a bit of a human-centered arrogance. What about the other 99% of morality that centers around physical reality? I mean, you can argue that there's no pure idea, that every idea is based on physical reality. So it's quite, in my opinion, quite arrogant to just assume morality is relative. It's subjective, and then the next leap is that it's relative because it's subjective. Never addressing the fact that subjective in this sense just means perceived subjectively, not that it's relative or that it's left to the individual to make a judgment which is the same as everybody else's judgment. We have consequentialism. To think in such a way that totally discounts the evaluation of consequence is absurd. And so when I argue for objective morality, I'm basically saying that most of what morality is emerges from deterministic physical processes or, evolutionary determinants where we had to do things in order to survive. Sure. But it's more than that. It's also physical reality. The way physical reality is divided up sets the stage for how human morality emerges. And you may have options that you can choose from, but in a lot of cases, in most cases, it's not you creating those options. It's a balance of deterministic contingency that all leads to a certain situation. And it's situational, but it's not relative, it's relational. And there's a certain amount of it that's you educating yourself. And that gives you more power to overcome the power of deterministic contingency in the situation. It's not all deterministic and reality, but at the same time, it's not all you choosing. And in fact, I'd say the majority of it is reality's determinism. And only when you build up the power within yourself to overcome that deterministic power will you be able to create choices that are close to your own. But then you have to talk about internal drivers. But the point is, objective ethics for me is addressing the physical foundation that ethics emerges to annihilate the notion that morality is subjective because it's only subjectively perceived, and it's not subjective so that you can just jump to it being relative. It's not relative because it's based on reality and the foundation of what it is. The majority of what it is was determined before humans even came into being, was determined a priori, before human experience. And then later we add human experience, and then humans add the goals to reality, and then we calculate how to make certain goals happen by looking at reality and driving the decisions. With no goals, sure, there's no morality because there's no goal. It's just reality being reality. But as soon as you add goals, morality emerges. And of course, the foundational goal, the maximum goal, the top level group is the human group. And we can extend that to animals, and we can extend that to the balance we experience with the earth, and we can extend that to alien visitation. But for right now, we need to, as humans, focus on just getting our mind around the group human. Because right now, the problem is subgrouping. And subgrouping against the group human, universal humanism is immoral. Subgrouping is immoral because it subverts the universal humanistic goal, the apex goal of ethics. So that's what I mean when I say that's what I mean when I say morality is objective. And so there's other people that when they argue for objective morality, for the most part, they're talking about inserting God to avoid relativism, to avoid what they see as the subjective foundation of morality, which is supposed to be relative, and you can't have anything but relativism unless you insert God into the equation. And so these are the kinds of people that are coming up with the evolutionary debunking arguments, and there is sound philosophy behind it. But it's more sound philosophy by process rather than sound philosophy by outcome. No, the more legitimate foundation of evolutionary debunking theory is basically reliability and truth tracking. Just because certain norms like tribalism were useful in the past doesn't mean that they're useful now. And if we were to assume that the past tells us what morality is, then we would see that it's actually not effective today in producing good outcomes. Tribalism doesn't produce good outcomes today. Genealogical accounts of morality. There's three main genealogical accounts of morality. Ontogenetic. The ontogenetic perspective highlights the role of learning, socialization, and cognitive development in shaping moral understanding and behavior. Socio-historical. The socio-historical account of morality focuses on understanding morality within the context of societal and historical influences. Evolutionary. The evolutionary account of morality posits that moral behavior and values have evolved over time through natural selection and other evolutionary processes. Like the idea of how we divide morality is important. It's like the idea of it being destructive or unfavorable to just kill someone for our own entertainment. Is that just relative with no reason to get behind that other than randomly picking it? It seems good. Or is it wrong? I mean, it's effectively wrong because it creates chaos when you need order, and chaos is not beneficial to you. But there's more to it than that. The emergence of empathy. It's pretty obvious that the most important goal for humans is human flourishing and the avoidance of human destruction. This isn't random. Humans and how humans exist, both their capabilities and their limitations, are effectively deterministic. These capabilities and limitations project a series of choices. We apply a goal and then we make choices that we think will bring us to that goal. Often different goals are treated as the same, or they're treated as relativistic when the consequential outcomes are very different. And just maybe basically reductionists look at things and they just don't even take consequentialism into account. And they just think of it kind of like principle. But you can look at the outcomes and see that they're destructive. So whether you take it on principle or not, it's still wrong. The evolutionary debunking argument suggests that if our moral beliefs can be explained by evolutionary processes without reference to their truth or accuracy, then those beliefs may lack justification or warrant. Tribalism is a good example of this. In modern society, where many types of people have to coexist, tribalist tendencies are destructive. A moral norm like tribalism definitely serves the group in certain situations from an evolutionary perspective, but as the situation changes, it actually becomes destructive. The main goal is still human flourishing, but it's the flourishing of my group over your group, which in the end undermines the master group of all humans. The all humans group is the most advanced, most elevated goal to strive for. Living for subgroups, it has to be immoral. We can do it in the short term, but in the end, we have to understand that living for the whole group is the master goal. Living for subgroups has to be considered immoral based on objective observations about the destructive nature of exclusion and violence. Evolutionary debunking arguments are fairly easy to debunk themselves. One common criticism is that the EDA commits the genetic fallacy by conflating the origins of our beliefs with their truth or justification. Even if moral beliefs have evolutionary origins, it does not follow that they are unjustifiable or unreliable. Critics contend that the EDA fails to establish a direct link between evolutionary explanations and the epistemic status of moral beliefs. Philosophers argue that EDA overlooks the possibility of evolutionary convergence or multiple realizability, wherein different evolutionary pathways can lead to similar moral beliefs or judgments. This suggests that the evolutionary origins of moral beliefs may not necessarily undermine their reliability or justification. So I kind of really think that the idea of God evolves out of the notion that we never truly become adults. We're just kids that grow up, but we still have this feeling that we want someone else to be responsible for us. We want someone else to be there when we get in over our head. We want that feeling of having a parent. Mentors and teachers and people like that we know are just people like us. So they don't really provide that feeling. But an omniscient, omnipotent being who is in control of everything could never be displaced from the place in our minds that provides us comfort. So we look at this as just being unreal, and we reject it in favor of not accepting it. I don't want to say atheism, but let's just say a situation of we don't suspend our disbelief in order to allow this part of our mind to grow. We become focused on the existential crisis that is life. When we get it, we bring it into focus. It becomes pronounced to us, and we understand what we're facing. Someone had said to me one time, and I thought it was great, a great saying is, why do I want to turn the lights on in the room just to figure out that it's something that I don't want to see? And I think we're faced with this. Those of us who have decided we want to face the truth, and when we want to face the beauty of reality, we're faced with the idea that we're looking at the reality with all its horrors and tragedy also. And this takes a toll on us. And so whether it's a beneficial choice or not, it's arguable. But certainly the choice is one that the world needs in order to maintain a rational, reasonable society that eliminates war and conflict and unnecessary separation. Are you an escapist, or will you face it? Many religious people will balk at being called escapists. They'll say leading a religious life is not an easy life because you're persecuted. And I always push back on that, because the reason why religious people are persecuted is because they lead with exclusion. And they're persecuted by everybody else because it's pretentious to come to people and talk down to them as if they are somehow deficient. And that reputation precedes any religious person. And also, it's unethical because they choose subgroups over the universal human group. So I want to say, and I want to point out, that according to universal humanism, religion is immoral. Religion is destructive. Subgroups can be okay for the short term, but that's not what religion does. Religion perpetuates subgroups as a long-term goal. It splits families. It creates unnecessary division in society that subverts universal human necessity. So I'm here to say out loud that religion is immoral at its core. It goes against universal humanism. So the religious life is hard. Yeah, the religious life is hard because you make it hard by excluding everybody else who's not like you, even though there's no universal reason to exclude them. It's all basically particular. While tribalism was useful at the time, let's say that it wasn't a fully evolved mode of ethics or goodness, because those people, the tribes were far apart. They weren't forced to deal with different people very often. But when you're forced to deal with different kinds of people, universality emerges as a necessary deterministic idea that creates a tolerance. And we have to separate it by necessity of universal and particulars which aren't necessary, all the way at the aesthetic level. And we have to reprimand those that go against universal human necessity only to perpetuate particular aesthetics. Just because you look different, just because your food is different, I'm going to, let's just say, kill you. Why is that wrong? We know that's wrong because it's particularity subverting universality. We all know it's wrong. Maybe we don't know clearly why we feel that it's wrong, but I'm saying that it's subverting the apex morality of universal humanism. Tribalism versus universality, it's not relative, it's relational, and one is better and more evolved than the other. They're not just different points of view. So if we who adopt universal humanism or live by universal humanism without calling it that. I mean, it's just being a good person. If you like this kind of philosophical subject matter, help us by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. I'm trying to be more authentic when I deliver these scripts so that you guys can get to know me. Hey, you might not even like me. You might, I mean, I'm fairly divisive because I'm not a relativist. Relativists are always very palatable for everybody, but that's not what we need. And you know, my YouTube channel might suffer because of this from a number of perspectives. Some people aren't ready to ditch relativism yet, and some might just think of it as a divisive attitude in itself when it's really the affirmation of the apex of universality. It's going to sound like divisiveness to someone who doesn't really understand that actually some separation is necessary. And we just have to determine when, so that when people that are also separating by particulars are not somehow elevated indirectly by people that are supposed to be separating by universals. You know, if we don't define universality, people that are doing it wrong become elevated indirectly by just pretending that they're somehow on par with the apex morality by indirectly doing whatever they want and then just pretending like everything is different for everybody, when in fact one is destructive for humans and it's selfish and destructive for the larger group, and another is maybe destructive for those perpetuating their particularity as universals in the short term, but it's a long-term affirmation that's never going to go away. This affirmation is what we are. As long as humans exist, this realization will always be there. It will, universal humanism, and like I said, we may extend it to animals, we may extend it for alien contact, we may create a balance between us and the earth, but this is all part of that apex morality, the universal human morality that subverts subgrouping, that says subgrouping is immoral, and does what it has to do to push subgrouping out. If you like this kind of philosophy, help us grow the channel by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Thanks, YouTube.